Alex, can you see me?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, I'm trying to put it on Facebook and things.
And in breaking news, an historical world event is
Tuesday?
happening just before Purim this year on Sunday, the 21st of February. At the exact same moment,
I don't know what I have done. Give me a minute. You see that Netanyahu said it was the greatest disaster Israel has ever had. Non-military thing. Okay. Let's give it 30 seconds more. Let me see if it's on Facebook. Okay, good luck, everybody. And once again, we are very privileged to hear stories from the Rebbe, from Rabbi Karlebach. This last week was Lag BaOmer. It was a very special festival by the Rebbe. The tragedy that happened this week, I'm going to ask Rabbi Karlebach just to give his insights into it. And please God, through hearing stories of the Rebbe and miracles of the Rebbe, we should all be blessed with a good week and the ultimate bracha of all, the revelation of Mashiach, which the world needs so much at this time.
Amen. Thank you, Rabbi Masinta. A good vach to everybody. It is actually with a very heavy heart that we start tonight's broadcast on Lag BaOmer with the Rebbe. A terrible tragedy happened at 1 o'clock in the morning in Miron, where Nebuch 45 people or so lost their lives. Mishpachos are broken. There are no words to these events. Unfortunately, even one of the heroes of Lag BaOmer, Rabbi Akiva himself, we say in the Yom Kippur davening, also had a tragedy at the end of his life, to the degree that even the Malachim asked Hashem, Zu Teira v'Zu Schara, how can such a thing happen to such a great Tana who even Moshe Rabbeinu envied? And Hashem's answer is, that is my decree. We will never understand what happened. Our tefillas, our prayers, our tehillim go out to all the Petzuim, to all the many wounded there, to the families of those who lost loved ones. May the schus of the Rashbi, of his Yom Hilula, truly stand them all, and Klal Yisrael in good stead. The only answer we have to this being referred to as one of the greatest non-military tragedies in Israel. May it stand, the only answer to these and all other tragedies is the coming of Mashiach, and may that be soon. I'd like to begin with the concept of Lag BaOmer and how it became such an important facet in Hasidus in general. Lag BaOmer was actually mainly, as far as I understand, introduced to the world in the time of the Arizal, Reb Chaim Vital, who taught what Lag BaOmer is all about. The Zohar tells us that one time Jews needed rain, and they came to the Rashbi, to Rab Shimon Bar Yochai, and he taught a Torah on the famous pasuk in Tehillim, Hine Matov Umanoim Sheves Achim Gam Yochad, and as a result of it, rain came. And the Rebbe, in one of his Mamorim, discusses that there are three aspects about going to the Tsadik of the generation. One is receiving a bracha. We discussed that. The other is a tefillah when they daven. And a bracha comes, he says, from Chochmah of Maaseh Bereishis. and a tefillah comes from Chochmah of Torah. But then the Rashbi said a Torah, and his Torah comes from Or Ein Sof itself, higher than anything, and that can change the whole creation, because that is connected to Pnimius HaTorah, to the inner light of Torah, and the inner light of Torah is connected to Or Ein Sof, the infinite light of the Almighty, and that bridges over all any natural inhibitions or stories of creation. So let's hope again that this light of Or Ein Sof can truly lighten up all Klal Yisrael over the tragedies that happened this Lag BaOmer and the specifics. But Lag BaOmer itself is associated, as everybody knows, with the great Rabbi Akiva, who the Gemara says lost his 24,000 students in the period of the Omer, which made this period such a sad one. And Lag BaOmer Posku, they stopped dying, and that they started Lag BaOmer to become kind of a festival. Rabbi Akiva didn't give up. He started again with only 5 students. The greatest of them was Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, as we know, was forced to go into hiding because of the words he had used against the Romans, which were similarly to the Nazis of our day. That's what the Romans were to the Jews in their day. They destroyed the second Beis HaMikdash. They killed millions of us. And the Rashbi said any good accomplishments they did was only for their own self-grandizement. And as a result, he had to go into hiding. He went to a place called Pekin. There's a cave there. He lived there for 12 years together with his son, Rebbe Lazar. They ate carobs. Carob tree grew there and a well grew there. I happened to visit Pekin, by the way, and you can see where they tell you the tree is, the cave is, and where the stream, the well, still passes by that cave. It's quite fascinating. And he came out of the cave after 12 years. Then he had to go back for a 13th year. In that time, we are told that he started to reveal Pnimis HaTorah, the inner secrets of Torah, which, as I said, is connected straight to the Or Ein Sof, the infinite light. And he also authored the Zohar at that time. It was hidden for approximately 1,000 years and then uncovered. And finally, in the 15th, 16th century, the Arizal, together with his student Rab Chaim Vital, started to reveal Pnimius HaTorah, and we are told mitzvah legalos. It is an absolute mitzvah to reveal the innermost secrets of Torah, and it is with these books that Mashiach will come. And so Hasidim specifically, most especially, celebrated Lag BaOmer, I think, a lot more than the rest of Jewry did. The Rebbe wrote in the Hayom Yom, as we discussed last week already, that the Mittler Rebbe used to go out into the fields with his Hasidim, and he would even take l'chaim, even though the doctors had forbidden him to do it, and would give many, many brachas, especially for childless children. And now let's get to America. In 1942, Mesibish Shabbos was set up. The Rebbe had come to America in 1941. America in the 1940s was not the America that we have today. Judaism was not championed to that degree in the wider society. It was considered du bist a greener, you're a greenhorn if you still keep to Judaism. We have to go into the melting pot. And Judaism in many ways was hidden. Like some said, you should be looking like the average person in society outside, be Jewish inside. When the Rebbe started Merkas L'Inyonei Chinuch under his father-in-law, the Frierdiker Rebbe, he wanted to teach Jewish pride. And in 1942, Mesibas Shabbos started a little gathering on Lag Bomer. 1943, also there was a shtickle Lag Bomer parade. The first Lag Bomer parade that was under the Rebbe being Rebbe was in 1953. It wasn't a big parade. They would only start blocking off Eastern Parkway in 1956, as I'll discuss shortly. But all in all, Lag Bomers that fell out on a Sunday would be accompanied by a parade, and the Rebbe would come out to it. Now, we should appreciate the Rebbe's schedule was counted for every second, literally, as we've been discussing over these Mitzvah Shabbos broadcasts. You'll never find a person busier than the Rebbe. And the only way, it was supernatural, but the only way he could do it is accounting for every second. And yet the hours he took to spend with the children of Lag Bomer and the emotion you saw is something phenomenal. All in all, as we'll discuss, the Rebbe came out to 12 Lag Bomer parades. 11 of them were on a Sunday, and one of them, as we'll shortly discuss, was during the week. So the first parade was in 1953. And as I said, that was still a small parade. It wasn't blocking off streets. And the Rebbe was stood what they call on the Shalosh. That was where 770 is expanded. There was a shtickle like courtyard, whatever you call it. And the Rebbe asked them to sing the Animamin. And this was the first time the Rebbe spoke a sicha in English. The concept of the parades was to counteract what I started with. Judaism, Torah, was not publicized enough. And what the Rebbe wanted to do was that they should march down the main street. You have police vans, fire trucks serenading with sirens, marching bands representing every branch of the military, and that is Judaism and Torah should be full of open pride. Because in the 50s, the prevailing attitude was that the practice of religion is a private affair. You don't have to flaunt your belief or wear your heart on your sleeves. You do what you got to do, but the neighbors don't need to know about it. And some people felt that my faith and feelings should be between Hashem and myself. If someone cares enough to approach me, I'll share my beliefs with them, but it is their choice and not mine. The Rebbe had a total different outlook. He said, we should march our children down the highway, teach them there's no shame in publicly affirming our faith. We are proud of our passion and willing to share it. And everyone should have the benefit, the show of faith. Why should publicity be the exclusive providence of scandals, advertising, and sports? Rather, let everyone join the fun and be welcome to a world of living Judaism and committed Jews. And we show our children that we have nothing to hide and everything they teach. And they build the parades as a salute to Judaism. So that was 1953. The Rebbe began telling them to sing Ani Mamin. And that year, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Hecht was actually the person to translate. The first true parade where the Eastern Parkway was closed off was in 1956. 2,000 children, and mainly from Mesiba Shabbos, they all gathered. As I say, Eastern Parkway was closed off, and after the Rebbe had addressed them, and Shlomo Zalman Hecht then translated, the children marched to Nostrand Avenue, and then they would go to Prospect Park. Although the Rebbe had already spent a lot of time with them at that official parade, he came to Prospect Park. He drove over there. It was a big surprise to everyone, and he spent a time there. The parade expanded. And in 1957, there was the preparations for the big parade. And the masker, or the Rebbe's secretary, Rabbi Rothstein, got up to the Chevra and he said, there is a verse in Torah that says, V'roha ha-kohen v'nirpa. He will see the Kohen and he will be healed. That there's a special thing in seeing the Kohen and seeing the Tsadik Hadar, which brings healing and brings wonderful brachas to everybody, and that everyone should encouraged to come to this parade. They organized 80 buses to come from all over it. They came from New Haven, they came from Connecticut, they came from all over metropolitan New York, and that already started an extremely big parade. The Rebbe spoke that Sicha, and that was the first year, and from then on, Rabbi J.J. Hecht would be the translator and the one to organize and to fear on, to lead the parade. So that was a most beautiful thing, and you could see many pictures of the 1957 parade. In 1960 was the next parade. As we all know, the Baal Shem Tov was born 1698 and passed away in 1760. So 1960 was 200 years since the Baal Shem Tov's passing. And the Rebbe would always take the opportunity of making a tumult of those anniversary years. So in the parade, you could see big signs up behind the Rebbe that this is 200 years since the Baal Shem Tov's passing. And obviously the Baal Shem Tov was the person who truly inspired children. I mean, he started off as a Malamed's helper He would help the teachers in those days. He would bring the children to the school and teach them Shema Yisrael and bring a pride into them. And that is obviously what the Lag Baimer parade did as well. In the 1960 parade, maybe others as well, you see such beautiful pictures of the Rebbe's mother standing right underneath, on the street underneath the Rebbe, with such nachas and pride in seeing what her son, the Rebbe, has done. And
I will try to show that at the end, by the way.
okay, beautiful. And how he literally changed the whole face of American Jewry just with these parades that he encouraged. And by the way, when we're talking about Lag B'Omer parades, here we're only mentioning parades by the Rebbe, but there were parades throughout the world, as we will still mention. I remember my 1980, my first parade here, which we'll talk about as well. So that was in 1960. In 1966, there were over 5,000 children already at the parade. And at this time, it wasn't only, you see, NCFJE, National Committee for Furtherance of Jewish Education, which was Rabbi Hecht's organization, and Shalah, they were a part, I guess, of Machne Yisrael, and they were in charge of bringing Yiddishkeit to all the public school children with the Wednesday hours. So they were the ones who organized the parades together with Mesiba Shabbos, and the children mostly came from Lubavitch and the public schools. In 1966, they began getting all the religious schools involved as well. And so from every track of life, from every society, the kids were coming, and there were the 5,000 children. They had slogans, children marching with different slogans: keep Shabbos, send your children to different schools, etc. In the Sikha of that year, generally, Bahar B'Chukaisai is very often associated with Lag B'Omer. This year it was unusual because it was Friday before Emor, but usually if it's on a Sunday, it's after Emor and Bahar B'Chukaisai. Now the opening words of B'Chukaisai is Im B'Chukaisai Telechu, if you go in my mitzvahs, V'nosati gishmeichem be'itom, I will give you the rain in the season. When the Rebbe quoted that pasuk, he left out the word im, if, and he left out the word gishmeichem, the rain. I'll give you rain. And Rabbi J.J. Hecht, I guess he didn't really notice it, and you're busy translating. So he translated the whole pasuk as it is. And the Rebbe said, I purposely left out the word im, because when you see Kenai and Hara, thousands of children marching with Jewish pride, then there is no im, if you will follow. There is a following. And I left out the word gishmeichem, rain, because that is not something we want or need in the parade. The next year, 1960, 1966, and 1967 is the next parade. I want you to think back, those who are old enough, it was my bar mitzvah year, to May 1967, the time of Lag B'Omer. Rachmana litzlan. We should never know about it, But those who think back, Gamal Abdel Nasser Yamach Shemoy V'Zichroi, the president of Egypt, ordered the United Nations, who they were supposedly protecting Israel. Israel was told, you don't need your army. Don't worry, the world will protect you. He told the United Nations to get their army out. And that's what they did. Here they were sworn to protect us. They just left. And Nasser got 22 Arab countries around Israel, and they threatened they are going to dump every single Jew into the sea. There's not going to be a survivor. The dread, the terror that Israel was caught up in is lo ya'umen ki yasupar. It cannot be exaggerated. Everybody down, from the governments, from the religious parties. And on Lag BaOmer, 1967, the Rebbe is one of the first ones, if not the only one, to bring confidence into the Jewish people. His face was flush, and he spoke with conviction and with a raised voice. And one of the things he said, from the Chumash in the Chukaisa, v'shaftem levetach ba'atzechem, you are going to dwell securely, peacefully in your country. Ve'ein machrid, there is nothing to fear. He foretold that Israel is going to have a total victory. And this was, as I say, the first person and possibly the only voice that brought confidence into the Israel. At that time, the Rebbe said no one should leave. Embassies were sending for their citizens to get out the country. And the Rebbe said no one should leave. It's going to be safe. And then the Rebbe asked Rabbi Chadakov in the parade, did anybody write down what I wrote? I wanted to look it over. And there was a recording of that. And Rabbi Weinberg, Oliver Shom, took that recording, rushed to the airport, and they publicized it in New York. This was the first time that the Rebbe's voice went out on radio in New York, and it went throughout Israel. And we cannot underestimate the hope, the courage that the Rebbe gave to people in Israel. It was, as they said, literally sheer prophecy of the Rebbe. Because at that time, Lag BaOmer, to the 6-Day War, there was just dread. He was the one who brought hope. I cannot overemphasize that enough of the Rebbe's prophecy about the 6-Day War. And he also told the children then that Hashem is going to do his miracles and everything is going to be okay. Israel is going to be a very safe country. But he also told the children to take every opportunity they can to do a bigger mitzvah, another mitzvah, and all. So that was in 1967. That's also the year the Rebbe came out with Mitzvah Tefillin, and he said that protects the Jews in a certain way that truly brought the Rebbe to the intention of the whole world if he hadn't been yet. The next parade was 1970. 1970 carries for me personal remembrances because that was the year I came to New York, and I took a participation in that parade. That parade was the first year that they came out with these flatbed trucks, and they would have these what's it called, or floats. They had all these floats with all different ideals of Torah. The float that I was on was the 7 days of the week. So I don't remember how I got on it, but I was one of the two sitting on the table for Shabbos. It was a very nice parade for me because I was sitting on the float the whole time. There was a guy in front of me who was my age, by the name of Yisrael Kaziminski. He's a big Chabad historian. He passed away recently. He could tell you stories of every aspect of Chabad, a wealth of information. And he was a short, very, very chubby guy. And they put on the float, I think it was for Friday, as the baker. He was dressed in a white apron, a white, and a big chef's hat. And as he passed by the Rebbe, he was busy taking in and taking out the challah. And it brought such a beautiful smile to the Rebbe's face. And later, the Rebbe called him mein Bäcker, the baker. In general, to see the Rebbe's face lit up at those Lag B'Omer parades, the great love and attention that he gave the children. It took hours for all the children who were on Eastern Parkway. I mean, this whole thing was closed off, and all the children would march by one, past the Rebbe, not one by one, but rows of people, but everyone passed by. And the Rebbe had his whole attention focused on them. You see beautiful pictures of the smiles of the Rebbe, of the waving. Don't forget, in a way, that was the only time that many people could photograph the Rebbe, because then he was standing on a podium outside in the open. And that was also a time that the United States Army was represented. And you had all these marching bands. The Rebbe, Rabbi Chaim Gutnick of Australia, he was a chief chaplain. The Rebbe had him come out in his full military uniforms as he stood behind the Rebbe. In one of those parades, there's a Rabbi, a Yaakov Goldstein, who is a big macher in the United States Army. He comes with a jeep and he salutes the Rebbe as he passes him, and the Rebbe returns the salute. And then in 1972, the Rebbe spoke over a half hour just on the concept of Mi Yehudi. That was the time. And it bothered the Rebbe so much throughout the years. That was the time that the very politicized aspect in the Knesset came, called Mihu Yehudi. The law of return, especially after the Holocaust, when so many Jews died because they were not citizens of any country. The Eastern European countries had revoked their citizenship. And so Israel stated that no Jew in the world will ever be without a homeland. There will never be a situation that they're not a citizen of a country, which is a tremendous thing and something we have to be very thankful for. But there was a tumult as to who would be called a Jew. And there's a massive correspondence that David Ben-Gurion wrote to all the Jewish leaders, including our Rebbe, on deciding how to word the law of return. And what they wrote is that anybody who is born to a Jewish mother or converts. But this word convert, the Rebbe said, needs one extra word, which is convert kahalacha, according to Torah law, because you have many sham converts with other groups of Jews besides the Orthodox, where you could just go to one of their rabbis, say you want to be Jewish, and within 5 minutes you'll get a paper and it means nothing. And he said this can cause so much harm to the Jewish people because our nation is dependent on the tradition of knowing who is Jewish or not. And if you bring this mihu Yehudi into law without Gir Kalocha, and he devoted a lot of time, close to a half hour, speaking about that. At the end, after all the children had marched through, the Rebbe signaled to people to dance, and there was a lot of dancing. The Rebbe went to the Ohel that day, and after Mincha, he came back and he made a surprise Farbrengen, which lasted till 10:45 that evening. And he truly seemed very happy with the whole parade. He congratulated the organizers for doing such a good job. And he gave a bottle of mashke to the people who had organized it. And Baruch Hashem, that was a great Kiddush Hashem. We now come to another year that I remember. By the way, in between 1970, there was also a Sunday, 1973. That was a very, very sad time, because although there was a Lag Bomer parade, the Rebbe gave his reasons that Shabbos before, but that was the one year that the Rebbe did not come out to the Lag Bomer parade that Sunday. In total, the Rebbe would come out to 12 parades. That was the only year that he didn't come out. The next year that I also remember, and I spoke about a little bit, was 1976, Tovshin Lamed Vov. That year, Achron Shel Pesach, the Rebbe came out with a campaign called Shnas HaChinuch, the year of education. And he encouraged all his Hasidim around the world to get Jewish children signed up for Torah education. I remember that year going to many homes, through Canarsie, through Long Island and everywhere. And we really did a big push on getting children to sign up for Jewish education. And the Hasidim felt that even though Lag Bomer was not on a Sunday, it would be a good idea for Shnas HaChinuch to make a Lag Bomer parade. And so they wrote to the Rebbe and asked permission. And the Rebbe's answer was that if they could attract a large number of Hasidim, of children to come to the parade, they should go ahead with it. They also organized, the first time, a phone connection to Miron. A couple of days leading up to the parade, it was the newscasts were all talking about terrible weather prediction. Rabbi J.J. Hecht, who had invested a fortune, I remember the buses, and going to all the public schools, they got permission from the public schools to allow their children, their Jewish children, not to go to school that day, but to come to this parade. And Rabbi J.J. Hecht wrote to the Rebbe and said, because of this terrible prediction of rain, maybe we should just cancel the parade. And the Rebbe answered, I will participate in the parade, so there's no reason to cancel it. This is something I told on a previous broadcast that I remember very, very vividly. Es hat gestürmt. The rain was coming down in buckets. It was such a bad feeling because people had invested a fortune in these floats, in these big hotbeds, and the projects they came out with, and the money expended, and the rain just washed them out. The morning of Lag BaOmer, es hat gegossen mit Regen, and I remember with the buses, we were going through the rain to the parents, and the parents were saying, "Bist du sugar?" Okay, they reluctantly put the raincoats and rain hats and pants and boots onto their kids and gave them umbrellas. Everyone was sure it would be a washout. But you could look it up. I saw it with my own eyes. As the Rebbe came to the Get Out 770, the sun shone. The weather in Brooklyn had changed miraculously. For Shnas HaChinuch, the Rebbe had suggested 6 psukim to be said. And that was said. And then he added, at the Lag BaOmer parade, he added another 6 psukim. And that became the famous 12 psukim that children study throughout the world. And it is told that every parade and every rally by the Rebbe from then on would be introduced with these 12 psukim. That was also the first time that there was not only one sikha, but there were a few sikhas where the Rebbe would speak and the Rabbi JJ would translate it, and then he added another. Interestingly enough, in that year, there was also a float that came by, and part of the float were a bunch of beds. And the Rebbe said, "How come there are no pillows on it?" That night, I remember going to watch the news at a friend's house, and the weatherman said, as predicted, it rained throughout the entire 5 boroughs in New York for some inexplainable reason. They can't work out how. None of the weather predictors could tell it, the forecasters, they couldn't understand. But in Brooklyn that year, there was no rain. And that was an amazing thing. And I want to read to you as to what happened in 1980, which would be the next parade. I remember coming to Morristown 1972. That year, many, many Russian Jews, Russia had opened up its gates to Jews, and they came through Vienna, they came to Israel, and they came to America. Sheepshead Bay, Brighton Beach became a very big Russian enclave. The Rebbe had asked people to prepare, actually, Nachlas Chabad and different places for the influx of Russian Jewry. We were amazed that there were children our age who, some of them had never seen the sun during the school year because it was illegal for parents not to send their children to public schools. Many Lubavitcher families didn't want to do that. So they said that their kids had gone to the grandparents, and the kids were hidden in basements. And the only time they could go out was at night. It was literally, you can't believe it. But they gave them an amazing chinuch. And when they came to us, they were on a par with us. So 1970s was a massive, large-scale Jewish emigration from the Soviet Union. But 1980 was a dark one for Soviet Jewry. And the New York Times reported an abrupt tightening of Soviet immigration procedures has resulted in decline in the number of Jews leaving for the West. And Soviet visa officials suddenly added a slew of new bureaucratic requirements. By the end of 1980, Jewish immigration from USSR had fallen by 58%. And it was drastic the next year and the next. Given these statistics, the embassy in Moscow said that Jewish immigration from the Soviet Union has come to an end. And that's an accomplished fact. And that was what the confidential Reagan-era national security description told. The monthly levels will probably not drop to zero, so that Soviet authorities can maintain a trickle of immigration as evidence that those who are truly deserving can still leave. Not only had it become nearly impossible for Jews to leave the Soviet Union, but it became difficult to even live there. Yuri Andropov, the head of the KGB, saw that there was an ideological subversion, and it's a matter of top importance. And in 1980, fortunes of Soviet Jewish, and for that matter, non-Jewish dissidents were threatened with arrested, imprisoned, exiled, and Jews, it affected the tutors, the Torah teachers, and the communal figures. The enemy was stepping up its attempt to stop emigration sentiment amongst the Jewish population, is what Andropov said in a speech before the KGB in 1981. And he wrote that they are trying to use not only nationalistic sentiments, but religious grounds, encouraging believers of different nationalities to leave the USSR. And Andropov said, we still have to set up counterintelligence efforts against the emissaries of subversive centers, and we have to strive to detect their hostile activities in Moscow, in Kiev, and across the border. They have to do things outside of Israel, of Russia, to make it difficult. And in other words, the KGB was actually everywhere throughout the world and more committed to its evil work. And for the Jews stuck behind the Iron Curtain, there was no end in sight. And now, you have another open miracle. On May 4th, 1980, 4,600 miles away from Moscow, a crack suddenly appeared. Speaking at a Lag B'Omer parade for children on Eastern Parkway, the Rebbe deviated from his regular use of Yiddish. And for the first time ever in public, he switched to Russian. That would not only surprise the hundreds of thousands of people listening either in person or over a live feed, amongst them recently arrived Soviet Jewries, but it sent an unprecedented message of hope to the Jews in the Eastern Bloc, and it placed the Kremlin on notice. The Rebbe didn't plead. He spoke loudly and demanded In no uncertain terms, he told Soviet authorities directly it was time that they follow the laws enshrined in their own constitution, that no official, whether lowly policeman or highly placed bureaucrat, dare stop a Jewish boy or girl from learning about Judaism or studying Torah and mitzvahs with their parents or grandparents. He likewise foresaw the dawn of liberty for those behind the Iron Curtain. And at a time very soon, he said, the Jews of Soviet Union would enjoy the true freedom granted to them by the Almighty. Rabbi Shlomo Galperin, a Russian-born chassid who had been given a Soviet exit visa just a few years before, was more than shocked. He couldn't believe his ears. He was there with all these Russian kids, and he told them, please listen, the Rebbe is speaking directly to Moscow. And that year, the kids who had come, Rabbi Hecht had spoken to them, and he said, more than 400 such parades are taking place in Jewish communities throughout the United States of America and on every continent around the world. And they are also tuned into the proceedings here. And at 11:20, the Rebbe came out of his office. He got onto the podium, and as in every parade, they sang the Ani Mamin, they said the 12 psukim, and then, after speaking a few siches in Hebrew, this guy Levin, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Levin, who was working on the Russian subcommittee, he was told that the Rebbe is calling you. And I ran towards the Rebbe's podium. By the time Levin got there, the Rebbe had begun speaking in Russian. He had only spoken that once before, with the understanding that the Rebbe wanted Levin to translate the talk. Hecht handed Levin his pen and the blank side of the papers, and Levin began writing. One can make out a young Levin to the Rebbe's left taking notes, with Hecht and the other non-Russian speakers on the dais, not sure of what was going on. Only a few in the immediate vicinity who did understand Russian. One of the few was the Rebbe's brother-in-law, the Rashag Rab Shmayahu Garari, who is rocking on his place, and on his face is the knowing smile of someone who recognizes that something extraordinary is unfolding. Levin understood the words too. He said his knees were trembling with awe. And that talk, the sheer power of it, he said only the Rebbe can do that. The Rebbe spoke to the Soviets in their language and tells them what to do. And first he began speaking to thousands of Russian Jews who are listening through hookup. And he said, the gathering has a special lesson for all those here today who have come from the USSR. And we see how God protects them, regardless of the fact that they grew up in a regime which for over 60 years has not allowed Jewish education in a widespread manner. They have come here with their children to a parade connected with Lag Baimer and Rab Shimon Bar Yochai, and in other countries as well. This shows the power of Yiddishkeit, the power of the Jewish people, no matter what gullus they are in or which regime they are under. if they decide with firm resolve to keep the way of God, to follow God's path as shown by his Torah, his holy mitzvahs, they will eventually overcome all difficulties. And the Rebbe added that Lag Baimer, the anniversary of the Rashbi's Hilula, is that the Rashbi himself had self-sacrifice to protect the Jewish faith in the face of the Roman Empire. And he had in his merit been endowed to the Jews of all future generations. The Jews who survived the horrors of the Soviet Union, torment their brothers in their West, have never encountered, have a particular mission to proclaim amongst all Jews with Jewish strength and feelings that a Jew can live a Jewish life regardless of all the pressures and difficulties Hashem provides for them, protects them and their children. And this is accomplished by being a living example here on this side of the Iron Curtain, how to live according to the directives. And we have to encourage their relatives on the other side not to give up hope, because the Rashbi taught that in every place where the Jews were exiles, the Shekhinah went with them. And wherever in the vast Soviet empire that a Jew finds himself, whether in relative freedom or even in government-imposed deportation, Hashem is found together with every one of them, protecting them and giving them the strength. Andropov would say in a speech to the KGB that they were listening to the Rebbe on Eastern Parkway. He had people there, and the Rebbe didn't mince his words. And the Rebbe spoke loudly. He said, there's another point in this lesson. We must tell all the children who are in the Soviet Union that according to the law of USSR, as guaranteed by the Soviet Constitution, every Jewish boy or girl can come to his parents and ask them to teach him about Yiddishkeit. And anyone who tries to prevent this is acting against the Soviet Constitution, against Soviet law. And such a person should be arrested and judged. And he said in the future, the official must protect and guarantee Jewish grandparents and parents can teach their sons and daughters what the Torah says without any disturbance. And he said, I hope this address is being heard in the Soviet Union. And he underlined again, and he told that there is coming a time very near that there will be true liberation of all the nations of the world on a foundation of eternal peace, and everyone will have true freedom in their everyday lives. And the Jewish people will enjoy a freedom that befits the 1,000-year Jewish tradition according to Torah. The Rebbe actually edited all these talks, and this would be the first of 10 Russian language talks that the Rebbe would deliver. In the coming days, this Lag BaOmer talk would be printed in a wide range of Russian Jewish newspapers, and it made a tumult wherever they were. He said that this Rabbi Uri Kameshov, who was living in Moscow, he had this unbelievable impression. He said he had never before heard the Rebbe speak in Russian. It gave us an upliftment that the Rebbe is thinking about us and paying attention to us. And they couldn't truly understand, but it was something totally from above. The Rebbe was seeing something that we didn't. Generally, the Rebbe's view was not to publicize these things, but that Lag BaOmer he did. And he said it would be the ultimate victory for the Jewish people. And they tried to make it a impossible dream to keep Yiddishkeit, but a little more than a decade after the Rebbe spoke, the Soviet Union would disintegrate, the speed at which it did shocking the world. The Rebbe had been right on all accounts, and he had called the KGB's bluff. I remember at that time hearing from Rabbi Avremel Shem Tov that the Rebbe had called him in and told him to tell the American government to get ready for the fall of the Soviet Union, and none of them could believe it. That was in 1980. And speaking about 1980, there are many pictures about the parade. The Lubavitch Foundation had the Torah Academy property on Louis Botha already. And I remember that parade actually took place in Yovel in 1980. But we were all working in Cliffy Kay's house in observatory, painting all the floats and that beautiful parade. I remember another parade that we had at the Torah Academy with all the signs, and then the Rabbi Mesinta and the Chabad house took them over. The Rebbe would also come out into the parades of 1983, 1984, 1987. And the last parade that we saw our Rebbe come out physically was in 1990. Let us hope that the schus of Lag BaOmer, reaching all the way to the Or Ein Sof, will be of comfort and consolation to the Yidden in Miron, in Eretz Yisrael, throughout the world, and that finally we will truly see the goal of Pnimius HaTorah, that Mashiach will be revealed now. Thank you, and a good fach.
So, we're going to try to show the screen.
Yeah, there's quite a few videos of the.
Yeah, I'm going to show 2 videos, hopefully.
Beautiful.
Hold on. Let's see if we can do this yet. Can I show screen there? There we go. That's coming up. Perfect.
Was Bruder der Ruhe lebt in der Liedbrände, dem Tod und dem Glück, von Seele, Eltern und Sprache.
May 28, 1967, was a day of three pivotal speeches. In Cairo, Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser held an international press conference. In Tel Aviv, Israeli Prime Minister Eshkol spoke to the people of Israel. And in New York, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, addressed world Jewry. Each of these messages attracted extreme attention. After all, it was only 8 days before the Middle East would be plunged into war. Israel is in itself an aggression. We will not accept any coexistence with Israel. The war with Israel is in effect since 1948. In plain words, the Arab armies led by Egypt intended to wipe Israel off the map. This was not an empty threat. Egypt, Syria, and Jordan were mobilizing vast armies on Israel's border and broadcasting the same intentions. On the same day, Prime Minister Eshkol delivered a message over the waves of Israel's national radio station, Kol Yisrael. While Nasser had spent weeks rallying the Middle East to a combined military onslaught against an isolated Israel, Eshkol had maintained an ominous silence since the start of the crisis. He now decided to reassure the jittery public that the IDF was adequately prepared to defend itself, and that Israel was navigating a diplomatic resolution through international channels. Neither was fully true. The military intelligence and civilian leaderships all predicted impending disaster. The Israeli public was already bracing itself for the most horrifying possibilities. Eshkol stumbled nervously, and Israel trembled. Shimon Peres later described the effect of Eshkol's fumbled address.
Eshkol's radio speech was simply traumatic. In retrospect, one could probably say that the public overreacted. But at the time, when you didn't know what is going to happen, and the whole world is applauding Nasser, at a time when we lost our self-confidence, and the worst doubts were voiced, the impression it created was of doubt and fear.
An Israeli colonel wrote, with his stuttering, he conveyed more insecurity and confusion. I heard that soldiers at the front burst out crying. And already alarmed Israel was thrown into panic. That same day, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, head of the Chabad Lubavitch movement, and a revered spiritual leader of world Jewry, delivered a public address that was broadcast around the globe, including a simultaneous translation from Yiddish to Hebrew on Israel's Kol Yisrael radio station that Eshkol had used only hours earlier. It was Lag BaOmer, a day of great rejoicing and mystical significance in the Jewish calendar. This year, though, Jewish hearts worldwide winced in worry over the existential threat that hung over the Jews of Israel. They had reason to fear, for it was now the Sunday before the outbreak of war. The Rebbe had called for a grand Lag BaOmer Jewish Children's Parade to publicly express Jewish pride and to encourage Torah observance. 20,000 Jewish school children from across America heeded the call, gathering with their parents and educators in the giant leaf-lined boulevard facing the Rebbe's headquarters in Brooklyn, New York. The Rebbe personally addressed the rally, but his forceful prediction took the world by surprise.
Was eure Brüder und Schwestern, was gefühlen sich in Eretz Akedesh und Eretz Israel, stehen sitzt in einem Lager, wo der Oberste beschützt sie und schickt sie seine Brüche und als Woche in die Schuhe und vergrößerte Nuss. Sie sollen nach Riss kommen und sie wollen nach Riss kommen. Von dem itchtigen Masel mit Hatzwoche und damit ist das mit Kühe. Ja, das, was wir haben gelernt in den sederen Nächten. Als die Schaft im Wetter bejaht als sie in Levitz Israel werden sitzen dort sicher. Wenn das sagt, ich schon in Behoret. Aber Oberste wird Mamschir sein, also sei schon in Eretz Agdesha. והאיסו לכם לליקים, וסריצי הריסקינים, ביוגי המויה הפסוכה הקדושה והרחולו, für sein breiter und offener und voller Hand, von allen Schwierigkeiten überzubringen, in Schulen und Bettach, in allem, in was nötig ist, und bekoren Mamos.
A singular voice of optimism in a universe of despair. The Rebbe's words electrified the Israeli public. Newspapers across Israel, regardless of affiliation, from Haaretz to Al HaMishmar, converted the Rebbe's astonishing message into headlines of hope. God is watching over the Holy Land, and salvation is near, cried the headlines of Yediot Achronot, an Israeli daily. The prediction seemed so utterly at odds with that of Israel's own leadership and the grim reality growing ever more dense around Israel's borders, just 8 days shy of the Six-Day War.
Beautiful.
Good luck, everybody. Rabbi Kalabach, thank you so much.
Thank
And
you.
in Metz Hashem, this week we should have the ultimate Geulah. The Izgalus and Mashiach take it from the end.
Amen. Shkayach. Thank you.